Well, the first part of this class was getting a bit grim, so let's return to something more cheerful. How can rich people pass on more of their money without paying tax? Okay, powers of appointment. A power of appointment is the authority to designate the next owner of property or the shares of the next owners. The person holding the power is called the donee. He's operating the whatever this kind of machinery is, lift thing, and he doesn't get to keep the property himself, but he can designate which of the various permissible appointees will get the property. The permissible appointees are called the objects. Now you remember from property class that property is a bundle of sticks. There are more sticks in that bundle than you could have imagined in your first year of property, and this stick is the right to give away someone else's property. What's so great about that? You don't get to keep the property, so what's the use? Well, gee, this whole class has been about the transmission of property at death, and I thought we all agreed that that was an important property interest. Some people think it's even a natural property right, and given that we've spent so much time on how to exercise this power to give away property, it's a bit late for you to argue now that this is boring or trivial, or at least more boring or trivial than the rest of the class. The advantages to the donor of a power of attorney are three. The first one is flexibility. You're letting someone in the future make a decision about who the next takers of property are going to be. You're taking advantage of the fact that the next generation and the one after that will know more about the circumstances in the future than you do. Hence, I chose this image of a child with binoculars sitting on his father's shoulders. He will be able to see further than his father can. The other two advantages are, again, for rich people. One is for tax planning. I didn't ask you to read about that, but I will tell you a little bit. And the third is asset protection, avoiding creditors, of course, as usual. This is just an illustration of the kind of flexibility you can get with a power of appointment. So imagine that Marie here, Marie is dying of cancer. She wants to leave her $1 million estate in trust for her husband Louis for his life, and at her death to one or more of the three children, but she doesn't know yet which of the children will need it most in about 30 years or whenever Louis dies. She doesn't just want to leave the money to Louis outright because he might remarry and then it would go to his second spouse. But she does feel comfortable about letting Louis decide among the children. So she executes this will saying my estate to Louis for his life, power of appointment, to direct in his will how it is to be divided among the three children after his death. So that puts the decision about how the money is to be distributed way in the future when more is known about the needs of the children. This slide is too full for a picture of me. I just want to give you some more ideas about when you might want to use a power of appointment, just to show you that this is not a ridiculous idea. So number one, the trust will come to an end after 90 years. I don't know whether it will be a good idea to divide corpus equally among the then living beneficiaries. Who knows? 90 years from now is 2110, and we have no idea what the world will be like then. Perhaps we want to give the final beneficiaries a power of appointment to decide what to do with the property at that point. Two is, suppose the trustee is someone to whom you don't want to give the decision about the final payout. So you want to perhaps make someone else hold the power of appointment. The trustee is good for investments, but for things like how the money is going to be distributed in the end, perhaps you trust someone else more to decide that very intimate family decisions, like who gets $1 million. Okay, so 3 is, suppose the wife gave her husband property outright and the husband remarried, he might give it all to the second wife. This is essentially the same example as Marie and Louis, my last one, giving him a liberal life estate and a power of attorney. Gives him a power of appointment, see, I did it myself, gives the husband most of the advantages of property while preserving it for the kids. And number 4 is giving the husband a power of appointment creates an incentive for the kids to be nice to him. This is such an old idea. At least it's an old idea about wills. So you might know I used to be an Egyptologist, and I worked on a community of individuals who lived around 1200 BC, and one of them was named Naunacht. She was, by the time she wrote her will, she was an old woman, but she married very young, a man who was about 60 years older than she was, and so she inherited money from him. She was a propertied woman, and she said in her will, I think she had about 8 children, to those of my children who put their hand in my hand, I will leave my property, but those who did not put their hand in my hand, I will not leave my property. So if the children had only known that their rich mother would disinherit them, perhaps they did know. Perhaps that's why some of them did put their hand in her hand. So getting your descendants to be nice to you is one of the big advantages of the power to devise property or to appoint it. The book says optimistically that once you understand the relationships, the meaning of a power of appointment follows naturally. I don't know even exactly what that means, let alone whether it's natural. But you just have to use these terms over and over again. The donor is the person with the money who's setting up the whole shebang. The donee is going to be his agent for selecting the next takers of the property. He can select among the permissible appointees or the objects. Object is a strange word. And once he's selected, they either become appointees because they've been appointed, or if he hasn't selected, then the property goes to the default takers, or if there are no default takers, and this is something I don't emphasize enough later on in the course, so pay attention here. If there are no default takers and nobody has been appointed, the property reverts to the donor's estate. There we are. Okay, definitions. So I think it's the vocabulary of powers of appointment that are really the stumbling block, especially since the vocabulary isn't intuitive. So a general power of appointment, oddly enough, means that the individual who holds the power, the donee, can appoint himself, one of the objects. So he can give the money to himself. He can take it for himself. Why that's called general, I don't know. Because the key to it is that a relatively small group, himself, his estate, or his creditors, are among the permissible objects, among the objects. A non-general or special power of appointment is one that allows the donee to give the property to anyone else, anyone except himself, his estate, or his creditors. So that works out to about 7 billion people. And it's odd that it's called special and the other one is called general. Could be everyone in the world. Apart from that, it's completely separate, is the question of whether the power can be exercised during the donee's lifetime, in which case it's called a lifetime power. At least that vocabulary is straightforward. Or whether it can only be exercised by will, in which case it's called a testamentary power. Here's a series of questions for you to test your knowledge of vocabulary. A little bit tedious, but you will find them in the quiz. Okay, creation of a power of appointment. The restatement of property says, ever helpfully, a power of appointment is created by a transfer that manifests a power of appointment. Oh, gee, thanks a lot, restatement. What it's trying to say is no specific words are required, though it's highly recommended that you do use the words power of appointment to avoid ambiguity. So the following would work. Say the trustee, say that the instructions say that the trustee shall pay the net income to Jane for life. Jane shall have the right to give the principal to any of my descendants. That would be a general power because Jane could give the property to herself. She's one of the permissible objects. It's presently exercisable because she has the right to give the property away during her lifetime. Now, the second example is the similar, but ending in Jane shall have the right to devise the trust property among her children. That is a non-general power because Jane cannot give the property to herself or her creditors, and it's testamentary because she can make the appointment only in a will. Remember that weeks ago we considered this example. I give to my trustees all of my paintings and furniture to give to such of my friends as they, my trustees, shall select. And there was something wrong with this as a trust. It was, dum-da-dum-dum, indefinite beneficiaries. Now we know how the settlor could have gotten what he wanted, which is how. He could have given the trustees a power of appointment to distribute the property among the donor's friends. So that gives the trustees more leeway. That is, they're not holding the property in trust anymore. They get to select who will get the paintings and furniture. Other ways in which a power of appointment differs from a trust. The donee doesn't have title to the property because he's just a donee. He's just a conduit. He can't manage the property, he can't sell it, he can't borrow against it. The donee has no fiduciary duties. Again, he's just a conduit, and he can select among the appointees as he likes. He can pick his favorite. He doesn't have to be loyal to all of the beneficiaries or treat them equally. And because there's no fiduciary duty, the donee can just fail to act. If he doesn't act at all, then the property goes to the takers in default or returns to the donor's estate. Okay, consider a presently exercisable general power of appointment on page 811. The terms, I've got the terms out of order here, but the terms of the transfer include: I give Kathy a lifetime power of appointment over $100,000. She can give the money only to herself. If she fails to exercise the power, then the money goes to the Red Cross. So this is almost an ownership because all she has to do is say yes. As soon as she executes the deed appointing herself, the money is hers, and there's very little difference between this and money in the bank. In order to get the money out of the bank, you also have to do something. Here you have to do something, and it's yours. This translates into 8 separate multiple choice questions. So I'm sorry, the only way to disaggregate it is to have multiple questions. You will see them in the quiz. I said a couple of slides back that one of the differences between a donee and a trustee is that the donee is not subject to the fiduciary duties. That's actually the rule in the Uniform Powers of Appointment Act, so it's not universal. But we're going to follow the UPAA, as we will get to know it in our chummy sort of way, and say that the holder of a power of appointment is not subject to the duties of loyalty or prudence. Of course, a trustee is subject to those duties. If a trustee is directed to distribute property among beneficiaries, then he must use prudence and loyalty in the process. We just don't call that a power of appointment, we call it a plain old distributive power. I know that I didn't ask you to read about tax, and I don't expect you to remember what's on this slide, which is why I don't feel so bad about packing it full. But I just want to give you another example of why rich people like powers of appointment. The IRS does treat, okay, so first of all, here's something not to like about powers of appointment. The IRS treats the donee of a general power of appointment as an owner for tax purposes, and the donee is taxed on the property. But, and here's the good news, if the power is governed by an ascertainable standard, like support, health, education, maintenance support, then the donee is not the owner for tax purposes. So here, now I'm finally getting to my big reveal. A donor can create a trust for A, in which A is the trustee, so has all of the management of the property. A enjoys the income. A has a non-general power of appointment, so the power to give it away, the property away to everyone except himself, and the power to consume for support. And voila, we've got almost all of the sticks of ownership, but we have avoided estate tax. This property right is not taxable at A's death. Now, there is going to be there are some tax consequences. The original donor is subject to generation skipping tax. Okay, you don't want to know this, but there's a $5 million exception for generation skipping tax. So all you save is $5 million, but still, some people consider that real money. So again, the takeaway from this slide is only that powers of appointment can be used to save estate tax if you're extraordinarily rich and are trying to slip through another 5 million. Different states have different rules about creditors, but we're just going to use the Uniform Power of Appointment Act rules. And those are that the creditors of a donee of a non-general special power of appointment cannot reach the property, which seems fair enough because the person holding the power can only appoint to others, not himself or his creditors or his estate. But if the donee holds a presently exercisable general power of appointment and all he has to do is reach out his hand to take the money, then he cannot, like this arrogant young man, pretend that he's not sitting next to a pile of cash and say, oh, I'm so poor I can't pay you. And finally, creditors of the donee of a testamentary general power of appointment can also reach the property, but only at the donee's death, because he has no power over it until his death. I didn't ask you to read about tax. I told you something about tax that you don't have to remember. I didn't ask you to read what's on this slide, but you do have to remember it. So you have to know these additional features about powers of appointment. What about a residuary clause of a will? The will says, I leave the rest and remainder of my estate to my daughter. Does that capture a power of appointment? Well, generally no. The only exception is if the power is general, so the individual could have taken the property for herself, and there's no taker in default. So in that case, who was supposed to get the property? We wouldn't know, so it might as well pass with her the bequest in her will. So other forms of power of appointment, ones that are not general or for which there is a taker in default, can be captured by a blanket exercise in the residuary clause, an exercise of the power. So if the residuary clause says, I leave everything to my daughter Jane, and adds, I include all property over which I have a power of appointment, that does exercise the power, including powers that are non-general or for which there is a power of a taker in default. Totally new subject, this final paragraph. The question of whether, if the terms of the power say that the donee can distribute it among the objects, and say there's 4 objects, does that mean that the donee could give everything to number 1 and nothing to the others, or does she have to distribute something to all of them, some substantial amount to all of them? The Uniform Powers of Appointment Act says that a power of appointment is presumptively what it calls exclusive or exclusionary, meaning that the donee can pick one or several objects and give all of the property to those and none to the others. So if the terms of the power don't say otherwise, and say the terms of the power are that my husband has a power of appointment over $1 million to distribute among our children, that gives the husband authority to pick 1 or 2 of the children and give all of the property to them, or to give 98% of them to the property to one child and 2% to the others. Of course, the language of the property can provide differently and can say to distribute among all of our children or each and every child, and in that case the husband who held the power in my last example would have to give something to each, some substantial amount to each. So that's the end of the PowerPoint presentation, and on to the quiz.